Welcome back. This week we're going to discuss the final three stages of the 8 stages of successful social movements. We talked about the first group, the first six, really. Last time we get more in depth into the sixth stage now, and then we'll discuss the seventh and eighth. Seventh is victory, so get ready to enjoy how we win.
So after this lecture, you should be able to understand the general tasks of the last three phases, 6, 7, and 8. Particularly, we're going to put some emphasis on how to navigate through the various phases of stage 6. You'll understand the mechanisms for success in stage 7, and then finally we'll go on to what comes after success.
And stage 6, speaking generally, because every front of struggle may be a little bit different stage, but speaking generally, the movement for economic, racial, environmental justice, as well as peace, is in, we believe, stage 6. So this is an important discussion of where we are right now, what our tasks are right now, and what we can do to advance to the final phase of success.
As we've said before, we think there's a lot of potential in the 2020s for transformative change in the United States.
Yeah, because we see the issues that we're all facing coming to a climax where the government and policymakers have been really unable to deal with these issues adequately. They've either ignored them or mishandled them, made them worse, or put in false solutions, and it's now no longer going to survive. People are just seeing the truth of the situation, and the situation got so strong, and the movement is growing. So you have both the movement and the issues kind of coming together, and if we organize the movement strongly and know we're in this stage and know how to work in this stage, we can really move on to success. The major focus of stage 6 is building national consensus. This is the majority stage. We already have majority support on many of the issues that we face, but now we want to build toward national consensus. And remember those 3 questions of national consensus. First, there's a problem. Second, that they are inadequate, there's no solution in the current system. And third, that your people are open to alternative solutions. And that's where we are right now, trying, especially in that third point, get people open to the idea of supporting alternative solutions.
Right. So this is really in stage 6, which can be a fairly long stage at a time of moving from being a primarily protest-based movement, as we were in stage 4 during the takeoff, to more of a long-term campaign. It's about bringing more people and involving more people into the campaign. It's about strategically thinking about ways that we can erode the power holders' support and bring that support to the movement side. It's about being a nurturing mother towards the grassroots to empower the grassroots, and also about putting forth a grand strategy for winning. What does that look like, and how do we get there?
And as you'll see, when we talk about grand strategy in this stage 6, it's different from the overall grand strategy we talked about building a mass movement, building stronger ties, building a bigger and more united campaign. The other point I just want to make is that first point, move from protest to long-term campaign. Don't fear. There will still be protests. Those of you who like protest, there are still moments where protest is useful and part of the strategy that they have to put forward.
So what does it mean to build a long-term campaign? This is really the hard day-to-day work of doing movement building, of doing local organizing, of educating people, reaching out to other segments of the population and showing them how the issue impacts them and bringing them into the movement, really building what we call a movement of movements, as we did during the fight against the Trans-Pacific Partnership.
Where you brought all these different segments of the movement together because they all realized they were all impacted by this issue.
Right. People were reaching out to people in the food justice movement and the environment, healthcare, workers.
Labor, yes.
Yeah, the internet.
Healthcare, yes. Pharmaceuticals, everything was affected.
Right. And it was really this broad movement that helped to change the political culture and defeat the Trans-Pacific Partnership in 2016.
And then in this phase, you also are becoming more of a mainstream movement. So you are going to get working with mainstream political and social institutions. You want to reach out and get them into the national consensus that you're trying to build. When you're talking about national consensus, you're not talking about a fringe radical element. You're talking about 65 to 85% of public opinion. So you reach out to the mainstream
while we're reaching out to like power holders, people in mainstream politics, who may be moving to our side and be a vehicle for gaining a wider audience for the issue and the problems and the solutions, we have to recognize that they're still, and some of these institutions are still in the power holder category. And so we have to make, walk that fine line of appreciating the work that they're doing if they, serve the movement by raising awareness, but recognizing that they aren't totally in our camp yet, or we don't have enough power yet to make sure that we hold them to the solution that we're fighting for.
People who go into government, maybe from the movement, or who are in government and who represent the movement's views, someone like Bernie Sanders, for example, we still have to recognize he's a power holder, and he has to answer to Chuck Schumer.
Right.
He has to answer the Democratic Party. He's in the leadership of the Democratic Party, even though he's an independent. He's in the leadership of the Democratic Party. He's been appointed by Schumer as their director of outreach, the top 5 positions in the Democratic Party. And so he has to respond to their pressure.
Right.
So it's very important for the movement to recognize he's in that position. He's a power holder. He's an ally on some issues, and we need to push him still and treat him as someone who's in power and who's not part of the people-powered campaign, but maybe representative of it in the government.
Right.
Now, during this phase of this long-term campaign, nonviolent actions still play a role. There'll be moments when something happens where it's an opportunity to highlight the injustice again, because highlighting that injustice helps again to keep building that national consensus. Right. Another African American is killed by police. There should be protests. There's people out there demanding prosecutions, and then people who are not involved in the movement but are aware of it will say, I can't believe they're still killing African Americans that way. These police, have got to be put on control. So you're building national consensus with those nonviolent actions at key times.
Or there may be things that the power holders are doing that we need to counter with nonviolent direct action. So if they're trying to suppress the issue in the media or misrepresent the issue, then we may need to use nonviolent direct action to raise awareness of that and to say, no, this isn't actually what's happening.
Right. And so that's a lot. And that last point on the list there, it says respond to trigger events. That's kind of what you're talking about. It's kind of what I'm talking about as far as nonviolent action still needed. The other big area that it needs a lot of work in this phase is building constructive programs. We always call that a 2-track strategy. Stop the machine, stop the bad things happening, create a new world. Build the alternative.
Right.
A lot of people over years have recognized that government people aren't ready to make change until they see their needs will be met by a new system.
Right.
And so it's very important, if we want to change the way that workers are treated, that we show workers that there's an alternative to being a slave wage, a low-wage slave wage. Right. Show them that increased incomes can work, that will actually help build the economy. Show them they can become owners.
Right, worker owners.
Like cooperatives are one method of that. To create these alternative systems and really build them up. Capitalism basically came to play during a time period outside of serfdom.
Right, feudalism. Yeah.
And so you have to build that alternative up. If you want to replace it, you got to have something to replace it with. Right. The other point I just want to make on this slide is the first point on low intensity local organizing. I worked with a former Black Panther who was a drug policy reform activist from Texas, and his family was very effective politically. And when I talked to him about organizing, he said, organizing means go out your door, take a left or right, go to your neighbor's house and go talk to them. Listen to what their needs are. Find out what their problems are. Offer to help solve those problems. Develop a relationship. That's what local organizing is. Right. That's one aspect of it. It's building that kind of relationship at the local level, person-to-person conversations. Now maybe it's social media conversations.
I think person to person is still very
person to person is critically important, and so just that's why we say it's a hard day-to-day work of organizing, because that's what it involves. It actually involves talking to people, getting them into the issue, getting them on your side, building that national consensus.
Building relationships, building trust, those are essential for being able to have an effective movement. And then I also wanted to comment on the constructive
that's very important
part, because while we're focused on, issues and potential policies that could resolve those issues, as we'll talk about, at the end of this lecture when we go into stage 8, we're really talking about ultimately transformative change.
Right.
And so part of that is building up these alternative systems that we want to have replace the current dysfunctional systems. So having these, fights around individual issues and policies are a way of building the movement, building that momentum, and continuing to build that towards really transformational change.
And we cover a lot of these transformational constructive programs on the economy on our website, itsoureconomy.us, which is a compilation of materials on a new economy. We call it economic democracy,
right.
Where public programs serve the interests of the people,
Right.
where some things that are currently privatized are made into public utilities.
Like water should be public.
Like
Internet access.
electric utilities, internet access should be a public
Access
use.
to healthcare.
And we also want to make sure that schools, are kept public and not designed to be profiteering centers for corporate interests.
Energy is another one. Decentralized energy, where people can be local energy producers and benefiting from that in a clean energy way, not selling your rights for oil or gas.
And when you that's also economic analyses. On healthcare, we have the health campaign, Health Over Profit Oriented, which puts forward an alternative, national improved Medicare for all. So that alternative is gaining a lot of support.
Right.
And then on election issues, like on democracy, one of the things that we push for in our constructive program advocacy are more direct democracy opportunities. For example, participatory budgeting.
Right.
This is starting to take off in small areas at this point, small cities, some of the large cities, it's smaller.
Like New York.
New York is doing
Chicago.
portions of their budget. And this is essentially people making decisions on where budget money goes. They actually propose an idea. They have community events where they discuss the idea over a period of time, and they usually have multiple ideas of discussing at once.
Right.
And then they vote as a community where money should go.
Right.
And we can really build that. We can make that even stronger. We can have, for example, on every tax return, people can put in place where they want their money to go.
Right.
Not that it'll go there, but you'll get from that a kind of a vote.
Right.
60% want their money to go to education first, to environmental protection first. Where's the military on that list?
Right.
It'll be very low on that list, even though right now it's almost 2/3 of our discretionary spending.
Right.
And so constructive programs are really important to kind of paint the picture of the new world we want to see and how it will function and how people's lives will be better. This is on that third point of national consensus, getting people ready to accept the idea of making transformational change, that they're open to ideas, open to alternatives. We show them through our constructive programs that the alternatives can work, that the alternatives can make their lives better.
Exactly. So during the kind of takeoff period, it was a moment when suddenly everything, people rose up, came out from, inside and took to the streets or whatever the action was, and so a lot of new people are coming in. It's a little bit of a chaotic time. It's not, it's people called it a leaderless time.
And it should be a chaotic time.
Right, and we called it leaderful. But for this stage 6, that model doesn't really work because it has a lot of weaknesses. As we talked about, infiltration is one of those weaknesses. During this phase, we really need a grand strategy. So we need to start to develop some structure to the movement, but we have to, at the same time, avoid developing so much structure that we become what's called a professional opposition organization. We think about them as the big NGOs that operate in our country, and we don't want to become a hierarchical, rigid type of organization. Particularly, we don't want to become an organization that is controlled by the money that it receives, that limits what the movement can advocate for. So we need some structure, but not that professional opposition organization type of structure, and we need to try to create a structure that again represents the type of society that we'd like to live in. So a structure that is more democratic, where more people have input into what how the decisions are made, and as Bill Moyer says, really important to be the nurturing mothers during this time. As more grassroots activists are getting involved, we want to be empowering them, supporting them, providing resources where we can, connecting people, and just really helping to fertilize and grow this movement.
It's really important during this period to recognize the grassroots is where our power is. Let's go back to those original broad grand strategy where we win because we are a mass movement. And so and mass movement means the grassroots.
Right.
And that's where our power is. And professional opposition organizations during this phase actually have even though POO's kind of a funny acronym, they actually have a very important role in this phase. Especially if they do it right. If they recognize the importance of the grassroots, they recognize that their power comes from the grassroots. So the reason why they're getting more access in Congress to legislators or the city council, wherever they're working, is because the grassroots has risen up
Right.
And the grassroots has created this national consensus that's growing. And that gives the professional opposition organizations more power. They need to recognize that that's where the power comes from. They need to recognize they are working with the grassroots.
Right.
They have to be very careful not to be captured by being in the power structure. They don't want to become friends of the legislators.
Right.
They have to keep that relationship clear. Yes, we can work with some legislators on some issues, but we need to constantly push them and let them know the grassroots is behind the professional organization, behind the advocacy group, whatever type it is, professional or non-professional, this nurturing mother new organization. That's where our power comes from. Got to emphasize the grassroots. We win because we're a mass movement. We lose if we shrink the mass movement.
Right.
So regarding the grand strategy for this phase of the movement, it's a complicated grand strategy and it takes some work to figure it out. The goal, of course, is to keep the issue in the spotlight, keep telling the truth, differentiate the false reason for a policy with the real effect of a policy. So that truth,
Right.
You are the truth-telling movement. You are the movement that's getting the grassroots to believe you, have credibility, keep telling the truth, keep the issue in the spotlight. You want to start to identify all of your demands. Now, during the takeoff, the demands were, we covered Black Lives Matter type demands. We covered inequality.
Occupy.
During the takeoff phase, you cover all these issues, but in this stage 6, it gets deeper and gets more complicated. And so you really have to go into your demands, think about what they are, be clear about what they are, and then you have to, because a movement has multiple fronts of struggle, go through each demand and see where it is in the 8 stages of successful social movements, because there'll be different work to be doing on each demand depending on what stage it's in. And the power holders at this point are going to be taking actions that will make it more difficult. They recognize that national consensus is going against them. They recognize that the grassroots is going against them, but they also recognize they have to keep the status quo to protect the interests that they are there that got them into office, their donors. And so they will try various strategies to deceive the movement. And it's very important for the movement to have a strategy that understands what their goal is, develop those demands very clearly, and not allow the power holders to take you off those demands with fake solutions.
Right. Right. We're really talking about, during this phase, creating a paradigm shift, getting people to think in a new way, to open themselves up to new systems and how that would make their lives better. And really important during this phase to stay flexible. As we alluded to, trigger events may occur. Opportunities when there's a new opportunity to put your issue into the spotlight and take action on it. You need to be flexible so you can respond to that. You also need to be flexible to respond to the power holders' tactics so that you can counter what they're doing. And I did want to just say that in terms of identifying the demands and mapping them, that even within kind of a single issue campaign, say the single payer healthcare campaign, there are multiple fronts of struggle in that. We are pushing overall for, a universal healthcare system that is publicly financed and nonprofit. But within that type of system, how do we want it to operate? We are, fighting to make sure that long-term care is included in there. We may be fighting to make sure that it's not just Western style medicine, but that complementary medicine is included in that. We need to be fighting to stop rural hospital closures and make sure that every community has access to a medical facility that offers full services to everyone. So there's
also efforts to push back toward the racial division we used to have in hospitals and medical care. We got to make sure we have racial justice.
Exactly.
In healthcare. It's a very critical issue.
We don't have enough primary care physicians. We need to be, there's a lot of sub-campaigns going on within that, even if we won National Improved Medicare for All, we have to keep fighting to make the system be the kind of system that we need it to be.
And we also see, since you brought up the healthcare issue, let's stay on that for a second. We're seeing from the power holders who see National Improved Medicare for All coming down the line, more and more people supporting it.
Right.
We're seeing the power holders adjusting, and they're trying. So our phrase is National Improved Medicare for All. They're putting out things like Medicare Choice.
Right.
Sounds
Medicare
like
Extra.
Medicare Extra for all.
Yeah.
Sounds like Medicare for all, but it's not Medicare for all.
Right.
They're also trying to push the movement to go to the state level.
Right.
And try to pass this in California or Washington State, states that are very supportive of single-payer health care.
Right.
Where
and
you
have strong progressive
have
movements.
very strong movements, strong single-payer movements, and strong progressive movements. Seem like they'd be more likely to win there, but does that really help the movement? Sometimes it does help the movement to go on the state level. We saw that certainly in the drug policy area, where and taking a sub issue like medical marijuana, where Proposition 215 in 1996 passed, and that started a whole avalanche of changes now to adult legal use. But will that help in the single payer issue? That's very hotly debated.
Right.
My view, is that it doesn't. That it can actually hurt us if we get states like Washington, Oregon, California, New York, maybe Illinois, Massachusetts, putting in place single payer, which right now is legally impossible, by the way. Just a lot of federal laws have to change, but just for sake of discussion, if you have those progressive states put in place single payer, why are they going to work on national improvement of care? Why are they going to try to solve the problem in Alabama? We need those progressive states to push for a national solution to this healthcare crisis.
So that every person has
And so we can't let the power holders push us off our track. We need to know where we want to go, what we want to accomplish, and not be fooled by their efforts to divert us.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about what power holders do to fight back during stage 6. And as you've mentioned, they use new terms, Medicare Extra for all.
Or steal our terms.
Right. They create myths to justify why we shouldn't do what we're fighting for, or why we should support the policy that they're advocating for. They use threats to, all of these to erode the public support for what it is that we're fighting for. I think they were very effective in 2009, 2010 by coming up with something called the public option in the healthcare fight, pulling a lot of single payer supporters into fighting for less, telling them that single payer was too much, we can't do it all at once. We've seen those tactics tried in the last year as well. And so we have to recognize these for what it is, for what they are.
They also try to discredit and disrupt the movement and co-opt it, divert it. In fact, they claim to be the movement. It's kind of funny to watch former Hillary Clinton staffers leading the resistance.
Right.
The resistance is going on well before Hillary Clinton ran for president, and it was a movement that challenged the people who fund the Democratic Party. Now with Trump in office, the Democrats have stolen the term because they see it's popular.
Right.
And so they are trying to co-opt the movement and claim to be the movement. They're not the movement. That resistance is a Democratic Party aligned effort.
Right.
And it's designed to elect Democrats to take control of the Congress and bring back the presidency. We have to be aware of that and watch for it. And they will develop new strategies to achieve their goals.
Right.
They are going to be flexible just like we're going to be flexible. And that's why it's always important to have that OODA loop.
Right. Remember the OODA loop, where you observe, orient, decide, and then take action. Observe where you are again, orient yourself, decide what you need to do, and you just keep doing that.
A good way to think about that is like a dogfight in between airplanes in World War II. The one plane moves, orient yourself. Where are they? And you have to adjust, and you have to, and that's how the movement is. It's always an adjusting process. You got to be flexible. You got to be aware. Got to be observing. Not be just repeating the same thing over and over. They develop new strategies. We develop new strategies. And what you also see the power holders do is they will not give up.
Right. In fact, they double down.
In fact, they double down. It's almost they become like they sense they're losing power. We're losing, and so they grab all. We're going to show them we have power, and they double down.
We're going to build a really big wall, and we're going to militarize it even more to keep immigrants out.
Or Jeff Sessions is going to tell the U.S. attorneys, go ahead and prosecute marijuana offenders in states that legalized it.
Right.
And so they'll trying to show that they still have strength. Sometimes that's a sign that you're winning.
Right.
Often it's a sign.
It's often a time of overreach where they go overboard and they're not in touch with where public opinion is, and it just backfires because people just go, oh, you're so out of touch with what we want, and that so violates the values that we're fighting for, that it just empowers people to fight more. And then
I was going to say, this is all part of a battle for national consensus.
Right.
They're trying to convince the public. We're trying to convince the public. We're all trying to get that national consensus on our side.
Yeah. And then sometimes the power holders will try to look like they're actually responding to what it is that the movement wants, and put forth insufficient, what we call false solutions that sound good, but they aren't really good. So something like cap and trade, for carbon, that people sold as, well, we can do this, to limit our carbon, and actually it was just a financial tool.
Just a Wall Streetizing of the Wall Street taking advantage of the climate issue.
Right. So we talked a little bit about what the power holders are doing. Let's talk a little bit about what the movement does, and first start out with talking about some of the things that we shouldn't do, that we should
Right.
avoid doing as a movement. And it's important for activists to be able to make that transition to be effective change agents and not get stuck in just, organizing protest after protest, even though that can be an interesting and fun activity to be engaged in.
And then also people can get frustrated because this is a slow stage. Organizing is not a fast and fun activity. It's talking to people, gradually building consensus. And so people sometimes get like they're ready for change now. We can't wait any longer. And so they want to try something with shortcuts. So you have the risk of more violence, more rebelliousness, more macho radicalism. And so we want to try to avoid that pitfall.
Right. Make sure that the movement recognizes that even though the power holders rarely, if ever, give credit to the movement for the successes that the movement wins, that the movement is having an impact, and recognizing that the work that we're doing is part of this stages of successful social movements, and that we are moving towards a victory.
And in addition to the power holders saying the movement's losing and all that kind of activity, you also have the risk of national organizations, the professional organizations saying, we're the ones that are making it happen.
Right.
You don't really matter. It's very important for national organizations to not take away power from the grassroots. They've got to be reminded over and over again, their power comes from the grassroots. They should not try to dominate the movement. They should be trying to listen to the movement. Mm-hmm. And if they do that, there can be a cohesive, synergistic reaction. But if they try to dominate or try to minimize, it's going to be a problem for the movement.
Right. Really important to resist co-optation by the power holders, and we'll go into that in a whole section of another lecture of what co-optation looks like. But basically, power holders can try to claim that they're the movement. They can try to take the movement off course into more of their playing field, and they can also convince people in the movement to compromise too early before we really get what it is we're fighting for.
And then again, this is another, because it's a long-term stage, the movement also has the potential of dividing. Mm-hmm. And you don't want to have the movement fall into different sects,
right,
different factions.
Right.
You want to keep the movement working together and not allow a factional dispute within the movement to really divide the movement. We have to remember, going back to our original grand strategy, mm-hmm. for the overall movement, one of them is cohesion, mm-hmm. keep the movement together. We want to keep that going here as well.
I also think that it's important that we're trying to build a broad movement.
Right.
And so we don't want to pigeonhole the movement into one type of political faction. So the healthcare, to me, because it's something we're so involved in, is a good example of that. That it's National Improved Medicare for All is being framed as a progressive issue. And,
good point.
And
good point.
We're trying to really show people who are not progressive, people who are centrist or even more conservative, that this is an issue that impacts all of us. Everybody needs health care, that a National Improved Medicare for All is fiscally conservative because it saves money. It's the most responsible way that we can use our money. But it's also a progressive issue because it's about equality for people. It's about equal access to care. It's about providing benefits that cover all of our healthcare needs. So it's really one of those issues that we shouldn't just pigeonhole it into one political camp, but we need to build, if we want to win a healthcare system that we can hold on to. We don't want it to become a political football like the Affordable Care Act did, where it was passed by the Democrats and then the Republicans were constantly against it. We want a system that has broad support and will last.
And on healthcare, there's no question that a single payer system, a National Improved Medicare for All, is good for the economy. Mm-hmm. It will lower the amount of money spent of our GDP on healthcare, which pays twice as much per person than most of the rest of the world that has a single payer system.
Right.
So it makes sense that it's a multi. You have to remember this majority phase we're in, we have majority support. Our goal is now national consensus support.
Right, supermajority.
And that means getting people across the political spectrum, people from both major parties and from third parties supporting the concepts that the movement's putting forward. So when you're doing this and this affects, same with like the energy transformation. You know, it needs to be understood that the world after oil and gas will be a better world. It'll be better for the economy, it'll be better for healthcare, it'll be better for communities. Communities can have solar arrays, better for individual homes. Can have
Better
their
for
own.
workers, cleaner jobs.
It has so many benefits. We have, again, this remember at this phase, your goal is national consensus. So don't be stuck in one political faction.
Right.
Open up to broaden it. Keep making room at the table to invite people into your dinner. Let them participate in creating this solution, so they're all part of the solution. They all recognize they have something to do with making this happen.
In fact, I think that was key during our Trans-Pacific Partnership fight, that we did work with groups that are on the right.
Oh, no question. No question.
Who were opposed to the Trans-Pacific Partnership for different reasons than we were. And some of them were in common. Some of them were about jobs. Some of them were about protecting our community's rights to, represent our own interests and keep out big polluters and corporations that just use our communities. But they were necessary because as people who are more progressive, we weren't the right people to be speaking to conservatives or conservative members of Congress, but they were. And so it really was, we had opposition on both of the major political parties.
And there are challenges working across the political spectrum.
Yeah.
We're also trying to involve a diverse movement. Mm-hmm. So while you want to get majority support, you also want to keep your diversity. So you want to have people of color, you want to have black communities, you want to have Hispanic communities, you want to have male, female, and so if you're reaching out to some conservative folks, those issues can be very difficult. And so while you can agree on some healthcare for all, doesn't mean you have to agree with everything all their philosophies. And so we want to improve on all those issues. And really, racism should be something that's nonpartisan. Anti-racism shouldn't be an issue that's limited to Republicans and Democrats. It should be across the political spectrum, everyone. But there are challenges. I've seen it when I've done work in anti-war work, trying to reach out to conservatives who oppose interventionism, who recognize that it's actually not that helpful to the United States or our economy, or a good role for us to play. There are people on the left side of the peace movement who don't want to associate with people on the conservative side of the peace movement. So it's it can be challenging, but it's something we have to work through and try to make happen.
Right. So the next two slides are going to go over kind of phases of stage 6. They're not totally phases because there's a lot of overlap. You're doing a lot of these things at the same time, but basically what we're doing is we're building towards a crisis point. And initially, we're working to keep the issue on the political and social agenda, to keep it in the national dialogue, keep people talking about it, continuing to win that supermajority support. And as that builds, then the power holders are going to be changing their strategies to try to counter this growing support. But the strategies they're putting forth are false solutions that don't actually solve the problem. So as the power holders are putting forth these false solutions and changing their strategy, we need to be countering our strategy by countering their strategy by showing that what they're putting forward is a gimmick, that it doesn't actually address the problem that we're trying to solve.
That kind of builds into the whole overall thing, educational goal we put forward early in the earlier phases, about showing the real problems and what they're claiming they're doing, the falsehood of what the power holder, the official policy is versus what really happens.
Right.
And that's the same thing with this. They put forward these false solutions. We just show them to be false and why they're false. It requires the movement to be very well educated.
Right. As the movement continues to push, the power holders are going to be pushed into an area that they're not comfortable with, as they have to start suddenly, talking about our issue and trying to appear like they're showing support for our issue.
And, as this starts to develop and you get your supermajority growing, there are going to be some holdouts in the power holder system, in the columns of support as well as elected officials, and you want to see who those are, and you want to target your strategies toward those people. You want to weaken those pillars that are still holding up. When you start seeing fractures in those pillars, you want to hit them harder to keep fracturing them. When you see holdouts in Congress that are not listening to the supermajority, That's an opportunity to go hold them accountable. So this is a time when you start to target your focus, be very strategic, and use tactics that really undermine the power holder structure. And during this development of national consensus, the policy that we're trying to achieve becomes more and more clear. It's like a microscope going into detail, and we can see all the issues. And as the movement gets to understand the policy more clearly, it realizes that it's more complicated, it's got more avenues to it, and other solutions are needed. And so you have to keep on looking at the issue, understanding it more deeply, and coming up with solutions that really put forward solutions to the broad overall problem.
Right. During this phase, you're also building stronger opposition to the current conditions and the current policies that are keeping those conditions in place, and you're putting forward these new solutions that would actually solve the problem and creating this whole shift in paradigm where people start to feel comfortable with those new solutions, comfortable with the vision that you're putting forward of a different kind of transformational
and
society.
as you get to that phase, you're talking about supermajority support for the solutions.
Right.
That third question.
Right.
There's a problem, it's not being solved.
We need to try something new.
Need to try something new.
Yeah.
And so as you're building this majority support, now you're focusing on real solutions. People are learning those solutions, they're understanding them more deeply, and you're getting supermajority support for new approaches to solving these crisis problems.
Right. And finally, your issue is getting put on the political agenda and on the legal agenda too, as you may see legislation for your issue.
You see candidates running on your issue.
Right.
You see candidates recognizing that this is where the public is. If I want to stay in power, I got to get with the program.
I need to run on this.
And so they start to run on your issue. Again, remember, they're still in power, and we have to keep pressuring them. Even our friends need to be pressured to keep on target.
And finally, at the end of stage 6, the power holders look like they're in line with public opinion. They're using the rhetoric, but they're at the same time attacking the movement and its solutions. So I think about what's happening right now with healthcare, single-payer healthcare, and the Democratic Party, and how, because a supermajority of Democratic voters support single-payer, more candidates, for Congress in the Democratic Party are saying that they support it, but at the same time, the party leadership is, as new leaks are showing us, are behind closed doors. They're attacking it. They're opposed to it.
Yeah, but the reality is they recognize that this is where public view is.
Right.
They want to be on that side, but they're still attached to the old system. Nancy Pelosi still has to raise tens of millions of dollars, and she raises it from the health insurance and other healthcare profiteers.
Right.
And so she's not yet ready to say, I'm going to push single payer. Even though she says she supports it, she has never done anything really to support it.
Right.
This is the moment when you really start to gel the final solution. You're getting to the point of a crisis. Mm-hmm. Martin Luther King always thought that when he did these kinds of civil disobedience protests, he was trying to create a crisis. He wanted to pull things to a crisis point, heighten the conflict so that people could see what the choices they had to make were.
Right. Right. So as the crisis point is reached, you're seeing opposition to the current policies has gotten very strong. Support for the alternative solution is also very strong. Everyone wants the issue to be solved, but the government is not able to take action. And so as that percolates and foments and grows, power holders are starting to join the call for change. And as more of the power holders start to move towards the public side, it makes it much harder for those who don't move. They pay a political price. It makes it much harder for them to stay in power.
It's kind of a quicksand moment where people are being pulled into this, new reality, this new paradigm, mm-hmm. and those that are, not in it yet are going to be left behind, and it's going to be, they're going to be out of power. And so this is the crisis is happening, the conflict is getting clear. The opposition to the current policy is getting clear. People are on our side, and it's time for a move to happen.
Right.
Now we're getting to the end
of stage 6.
The long stage of building national consensus. We're now showing real public support. Talking about 65 to 85% of public support for the cause, and so people are ready for change to happen.
But an interesting thing happens at the same time. While we have supermajority support, there's still about half people that are ready to move forward and half people that are still a little hesitant to let go of the current system for fear of kind of what it will be like.
That's why it's so important during this process that you're building that alternative.
Right.
So people, you want those, that half the population that supports what you're doing but isn't quite ready to leave the old system, to really be comfortable leaving the old system and joining the new approach, the transformational change.
So stage 7 is when
Yay!
is success, and that's when the movement moves into the offensive position. Finally, now our issue is on the agenda. People are moving more and more. Power holders are moving more and more our way, and so this is the stage where we win. Now, there's 3 ways where we can have victory. 3 kind of mechanisms of that, and I think of them as kind of the least sustainable to the most sustainable, the one that
or to the most fun,
to the safest,
the most fun to the least fun.
Okay, I don't. If you define that as fun, but so the first way, is if you've just reached this huge crisis, and everybody's in the street, everybody's screaming about it, something has to be done. The power holders have to take action, and it's a less of a controlled situation.
Yes.
And so in this situation, which Bill Moyer calls revolution, it's also likely for the power, or possible for the power holders, because they have so many resources and power and everything is a little bit chaotic, to take the movement off track and point it towards what's not really the real solution. So revolution is probably the most kind of chaotic
It's
and
very dynamic,
least desirable.
very
way for change.
dynamic, very chaotic. Things are happening fast, and because the power holders really do control a lot of power, the media, the money, the
military,
the various structures,
Yeah.
they can give you your revolution, take the dictator out, and everyone cheers, and then they can put a new dictator in.
Right.
And so the revolution can be complicated and taken off course.
I think victorious retreat is probably the most common way
Yes.
that change occurs, and this is where the power holders recognize that if they want to stay in power, they have to adopt what it is that the movement's asking for, and so they say, of course, we've always wanted that. We call this victorious retreat. So they retreat to the movement's position, but they claim victory. So we've always wanted, a racially equal society. We've always wanted to close our military
Nancy
bases.
Pelosi is very well positioned to say, I always supported single payer.
Before you were born.
Before I was even born. That's
And
right.
then, so this keeps the same system in power. You get, what you wanted, but the same system stays in power. And then the third, which I think is the most desirable, but I think also takes the longest, is what's called attrition. And that's where you're developing new systems to replace the current dysfunctional systems. And as those new systems grow, the current system just becomes irrelevant. So think about things like changing the economy, like developing more worker-owned cooperatives, or things like changing to public banks, or participatory budgeting.
Or solar community, solar arrays, or
Right.
so you gradually make these changes happen. They're happening all the time, and you almost even know they're happening.
Right.
It's such a slow process that you don't even realize that there's a really transformational change occurring. But that's how attrition is, and so sometimes in attrition you win and don't even know you won.
Right. You look back at the end of your life and you're like, oh.
Oh, we did win.
During stage 7, what the power holders can fall into is, as they're trying to respond to kind of the movement being on the offensive, is sometimes they're forced into making mistakes or overreaching on things, which then make it so obvious who they are and what they're about, and makes the public reject who they are.
Yeah, I think these power holders' actions are all ones that can be turned around on them.
Right.
Because now momentum is on our side. We've got not just majority, but supermajority support. The public is ready for change. The power holders that try to hold it back make stupid mistakes, and you turn those against them, and it actually increases the chance of success.
Right. This is a time when the movement is able to prevent power holders from carrying out their agenda. And it's also a point where, as the power holders start to panic in this crisis mode, that they can become even more repressive.
And this is why this repressive response is why a lot of the research shows that if you can get the security structure on the side of the movement, that's when the power holders really lose that power. If they can't be repressive, they try to be repressive, and the people in the security state say, I'm not going to fire on that crowd.
Right.
No, I'm not going to do that mass arrest.
Right.
Then the power holders are in real trouble. So again, this is one of those moments where if we've done your work right and you've done the outreach and shown even people in the security state that the world will be better for them if the change happens, then it's very hard for them to use this repressive tactic against the movement.
And the research shows that if you bring the police or military to your side, you have a 60% greater chance of being successful. So what does the movement do during stage 7?
Well, now we're in the end game. And so you've done your work before in stage 6, developing a strategy. So you've developed a end game strategy, and then you start to get really clear on what your demands are. And you're really pushing for a clear solution, a clear transformation that you've been working toward.
Right. And even though you'll never get credit for being successful, it's really important for activists to recognize at this stage that it is the work that they've put in that has made us, come to the point where we are and the point of being successful.
And it's an opportunity to start to show how the change you're making relates to even bigger paradigm issues. For example, if we win National Improved Medicare for All, that defeats the healthcare profiteer lobby. That decreases the whole money in government lobby, which is right now corrupting healthcare. It defeats the whole concept of privatization of public services. And so it becomes more of you're not just winning that battle, you're starting to create a paradigm shift that can be even more transformational on other issues.
Right. During this time, it's also important to continue to build that decentralized, more participatory type of structure, the more empowered people, more empowered leaders throughout the movement, because you want to keep growing that. And we'll talk about why that is in stage 8. But
the movement doesn't end.
Right.
And as you have these successes, you need to recognize them, take credit for them, empower people saying, you did this, you can do more, because the movement really needs to continue, because there will be always injustices beyond to continue to work toward ending.
During this period, some of the things that need to be avoided would be compromising too early or too many of your key values or demands. Remember the quote from Gandhi, you can't compromise on fundamentals because it's all give and no take. So you need to understand what are the areas where you can compromise and what are the areas where you can't do that.
And that's a big risk here, is you don't want to just you've done all this work for all these years of building a movement that you don't want to just settle for just a minor reform.
Right.
You want to work toward the real goal you're trying to achieve. So at this stage of success, don't limit your success just to a compromise.
Right.
Go for the full transformation that you're seeking to achieve.
And then finally, take credit, as we've said before, for the success that you've brought about, and don't let the victory of you win one thing. Don't let that stop the movement. The message throughout has got to be that that this is our bigger vision. And, we're moving towards this particular pathway towards that vision, but we're not all the way there yet. And so you have to continue to build that movement. And we were talking about that earlier today, about kind of the civil rights movement and how kind of they made all these big gains in the 1960s, the Voting Rights Act, Medicare and Medicaid, which integrated our hospitals across the country in a very short period of time.
The Voting Rights Act, the Housing Rights Acts, all sorts of civil rights laws passed.
Right, but then kind of the movement, for whatever reason, and there was, repression and other issues that came about, did not continue fighting for those things. I think there must have been a sense that there were victories won.
Well, it was a combination of things. I mean, of course, many of the people who went into government,
right,
and that became a problem,
right,
which we can talk about maybe a little bit. But more importantly, someone like Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, they were killed.
Right.
I mean, it was after the Civil Rights Acts passed
that they were killed,
and
they were calling for bigger changes.
Dr. King was calling for the Poor People's Campaign. He was challenging capitalism. He was challenging the war and militarism.
Right.
He was challenging the triple evils.
Right.
Racism, militarism, and capitalism. And he was killed making those. And so he was actually changed. He was focusing on the bigger paradigm shifts that were opportunities.
Right.
He was saying to the movement, look, we have power. We've achieved amazing stuff, but we can do more.
Right.
And then he's killed.
Right.
And same with Malcolm X.
Right.
And so the civil rights movement really never was completed. And now we're seeing the Poor People's Campaign coming back again 50 years later.
Yeah.
And the issues of, Black Lives Matter are raising about racial injustice, about police killing of blacks, about the economic unfairness
right.
For the black community. We see it in Baltimore very clearly. I mean, and as every city does, these issues still need to be fought, and that's because we were unable to really complete the civil rights movement because of various reasons.
Right. So during stage 8, which is, after you've gained your victory, the major tasks are then to watchdog and defend the gains that you've made, because the power structure never gives up. They're going to try to find ways to undermine the wins that you've had. Think of the net neutrality movement,
Yes.
how we were so excited to win net neutrality in 2015, and then a new administration comes in, a new head of the FCC comes in, undermines that, tries to take net neutrality away, and now the movement is again trying to use mechanisms.
We're right now in the process of defending those gains.
Right.
And that's a challenging fight.
Yeah.
Because the power structure has changed and they've adapted, and we have to adapt as well.
Right.
And so you look. We also mentioned how Dr. King was moving toward economic justice and ending militarism, ending poverty, and so new campaigns.
Right.
What are the injustices that are still remaining? There were clearly, the civil rights laws didn't end racism.
Right.
The civil rights laws didn't end economic injustice based on race or for anybody else.
Right.
And so there were new demands that needed made, new movements that needed to grow.
Right. Yeah. And then always building towards the more transformational change that we're trying to achieve. So continuing on towards that.
Ending capitalism, replacing it with an economic democracy. Ending militarism, replacing it with a system that does not rely on war to solve international disputes. And so there's always big tasks ahead.
That's right.
And so the movement continues. And so as you won this victory, you have to recognize that, and you are creating a people who will be lifelong social change agents. They've had a victory. You have to empower them. They're not just a protester of one issue. They're now someone who recognizes that people do have power, and we can even make more change.
Right. You want to keep growing the grassroots organizations, growing your networks with each other, broadening your analysis of the issues, and broadening the goals of the movement, and continue to put forward new alternatives, new worldviews, and new systems, instead of just focusing on opposing the old system.
Once you've cleared out the fight that you were in, then you're able to look again and see what issues are in those early stages, 8 stages of successful social movements. What's in stage 1, stage 2, stage 3? What is not taken off yet?
Right.
And there'll be opportunities for the next struggle to advance.
So we'll just close with a quote from Bill Moyer, where he says, "There is no end, there's only continuing struggle." And we'll see you next week.
Thanks for your time.